Dinoland USA is a rare example of Imagineering failure because the entire concept for this land basically left it doomed from the start. And this story is particularly sad because Dinoland USA had one of the most intricate, well thought out backstories of any land in Disney history. But it's that very backstory that led to this land being hated by guests and ultimately led to its demolishment. This is the story of the rise and fall of Dinoland USA. I'm Mouselet1, and for today's Mouselets Monday, we are diving into one of the most unbelievable backstories in Disney history. But before we get into the details of Dinoland USA, let's rewind a bit. When Animal Kingdom was in development in the 1990s, one of the Imagineers' biggest concerns was making sure that the park did not feel like just another zoo. So in order to make sure that it felt like an actual theme park, they broke it into 3 distinct sections, each focusing on a different type of animal. Existing animals, extinct animals, and imaginary animals, aka animals that don't exist. Existing animals would of course encompass the more traditional zoo-like elements of the park. Animals that don't exist would focus on mythical creatures, which became an idea called Beastly Kingdom and is one of Disney's most iconic unbuilt projects. If you want to learn more about that, we have a full Mouselets Monday deep dive up about it. And the third category, extinct animals, would focus on dinosaurs. So as Imagineers got to work planning this dinosaur area, they wanted it to have 2 attractions. The first was a Primeval safari, which would take guests back in time in order to experience dinosaurs as animatronics in their natural habitats. This indoor-outdoor ride was meant to be similar to Jungle Cruise in how it presented these animatronic animals to guests. And this was meant to be a slow-moving, casual ride that allowed guests to enjoy the beauty of this area. But the second ride was going to be an e-ticket centerpiece high-speed attraction. It was designed to look like an old-fashioned wooden roller coaster, similar to the Incredicoaster at California Adventure, and it was called the Excavator. And this is a ride that has gone down in theme park lore. It was going to bring guests on a harrowing journey through and around inactive dig sites, where they'd be racing through trenches, diving into tunnels, and flying past dinosaur-shaped things made out of excavator equipment. And this was going to be one of the centerpiece attractions at Animal Kingdom as a whole. But the Animal Kingdom project was incredibly ambitious, and it was very quickly becoming very expensive. As they began planning out the full park, they realized that a lot of the budget was going to go to 2 key aspects. The first was infrastructure. Animal Kingdom required far more underground utilities, animal care facilities, and backstage operations than any normal theme park. And building out all of those extra behind-the-scenes areas, including barns, vet clinics, and feeding facilities, all were quickly adding on to Animal Kingdom's already hefty price tag. And number 2 was Kilimanjaro safaris. Because building out a live safari with real African animals and an actual savanna was extremely costly, and this attraction quickly became the most expensive in the park. And when then CEO Michael Eisner saw the budget for the park climbing from $650 million to $1 billion, he told Imagineers that they needed to scale back other areas. We saw Beastly Kingdom get hit by those cuts. Again, check out the other Mouselets Monday deep dive if you want to learn more about that. But the other victim was the dinosaur section of the park. So Imagineers had to go back to the drawing board, but at this point, they were a few years out from those initial concepts they had created, and the landscape had changed a bit. Because in 1995, a ride called Indiana Jones Adventure: Temple of the Forbidden Eye opened at Disneyland. And it was quickly heralded as one of Disney's best e-ticket attractions. There were so many things that guests loved about this ride, including the incredible visual effects as well as the rover vehicle itself, because this ride was unique. For the first time, that rover vehicle made guests a part of the story as opposed to just an observer of the story. And it was that ride system that was soon seen as a perfect solution to bring to the dinosaur area of the park. Because Imagineers realized it would allow them to combine the thrills of the Excavator attraction with the audio animatronic safari into one single ride. And that is how we got the ride that we now know as Dinosaur. As a quick aside, that attraction actually opened under the name Countdown to Extinction. If you have a chance to ride this before it closes, take a look at the rover vehicles and you'll find the letters CTX as a tribute to the former name. So it opened in 1998 with the park as Countdown to Extinction, but a couple years later in the year 2000, Disney was prepping to release a very innovative film called Dinosaur. It used a lot of advanced CGI effects, and they were hoping that it would be a smash hit. And so Michael Eisner wanted to promote the film in the parks. If you know Disney history, you know know that this type of tactic was a Michael Eisner special. So Imagineers decided to modify the Countdown Extinction attraction in order to match the theme of the movie Dinosaur. That's why the animal that we go back in time to save is the iguanodon, which is the main character in the movie. And the Carnotaurus, the main enemy in the movie, was given a much larger role. They also scaled back some of the motion, dramatic lighting, and more scary set pieces in order to make the ride more kid-friendly. And that is how we got the dinosaur ride that we know today. So anyways, thanks to Indiana Jones, the ride problem was solved, but what about the rest of the land? Creating a full prehistoric landscapes with lifelike dinosaurs and animatronics wasn't going to be feasible with the new budget constraints. So Imagineers began to ask themselves, is there a way we can tell a story that justifies things looking a little cheap, but doesn't sacrifice Disney-level theming? And that led to the idea of changing the focus of the land from just dinosaurs themselves to instead people discovering dinosaurs. As Joe Rohde, lead Imagineer, later said, "We were trying to make the science of paleontology approachable. Not just a dinosaur land, but a land about what happens when people find dinosaurs. It became about storytelling and scale, not just spectacle." And that key decision is what led to Dinoland USA as we know it today. Imagineers decided to base the land off of a fictional, small, rural, Midwestern town where dinosaur bones were discovered, which they named Diggs County. And building off of that initial seed, they created one of the most complex, the most intricate, the most unbelievable backstories in Disney history. Because if you've ever thought that Dinoland USA looked a little run down or tacky, thought about the fact that the Dino Institute doesn't really match the vibe of the rest of the land, or even maybe notice things such as random beach chairs on the roof of Restaurantosaurus, all of that was part of an unbelievably detailed backstory that most guests unfortunately completely missed. In fact, we consider ourselves huge Disney backstory buffs, and we didn't even know the full extent of this backstory until we had the opportunity to take a tour of Dinoland with a former Imagineer. So, to tell you the truly amazing tale of that backstory, I'm going to take you back in time a little bit to December 2024, which was before Dinoland closed. My sister and I were doing an Instagram and TikTok series at the time called Factmas, where each day we shared a little known Disney fact. And for that series, we went to Dinoland USA and filmed a video sharing the full backstory of Diggs County. A warning, the sound quality on this video isn't amazing because we didn't have microphones, but I think it's worth sharing this way because you can actually see all of the pieces of Dinoland USA and how they fit together to form this unbelievable backstory. So without further ado, the backstory of Dinoland USA.
It's the early 1940s and we're in the sleepy Diggs County on US Route 498. There wasn't much going on Route 498 except of course drivers passing by who needed to stop for gas. A married couple, Chester and Hester, opened up a small gas station right along US Route 498. In 1948, an excavation took place and they actually found a dinosaur fossil right here in Diggs County. And suddenly this sleepy town had something of interest to the scientific community. And so the Dino Institute was founded here to find what else they could unearth. And so in this spot that they found the original bone, they created a huge dig site deemed the Boneyard. And here they found even more dinosaur fossils, cementing Diggs County as a landmark in America for dinosaur discoveries. And suddenly, US Route 498 began to get way more traffic. And being the entrepreneurs that they were, Chester and Hester realized that this was a money-making opportunity. And so they turned their gas station and their parking lot into Chester and Hester's Dino-Rama, which had rides and games. They turned their gas station into a gift shop that sold all sorts of dinosaur memorabilia. They were doing this on a budget, so they used a lot of old items from their gas station in order to make this happen. Like old tires for planters, car bumpers for shelves. They even painted over their old sign that showed the gas and its price. And inside of the dinosaur was all sorts of souvenirs that tourists would want. They decorated the store with toy dinosaurs everywhere. Meanwhile, outside of their gas station, they turned their parking lot into the Dino-Rama Fair. So let's go into the parking lot and take a look at how they transformed it. This parking lot had been sitting for years, so it was old. There were cracks in the ground and they left all the lines here, but they used what they had and they built this amazing fairground with games and rides. And in addition to the old parking lot, you'll find other remnants of their gas station like these tires as planter walls. Chester and Hester's Dino-Rama was everything fun, but everything but serious. And that left the Dino Institute displeased. The Dino Institute really didn't like being treated like a joke because they were making incredible advancements in this industry. Not only had they discovered so many fossils, but they were also building proprietary technology to take you back into time to the age of dinosaurs. And this was a lot of work, so they needed help. So in addition to hiring a big group of scientists, they also brought in a class of interns. And that meant bringing a lot more residents to Diggs County. So they had to retrofit some old spaces in order to create places for these people to live. So they used anything they had, this old Airstream camper, old buildings, to create a mess hall that also had to double as a dormitory for the interns. They called this just their restaurant. They kept it pretty simple, but of course their college interns wanted to have a little fun. They renamed it Restaurantosaurus. You can see on the roof, the interns were sitting there in chairs. They have a cooler and some cans of drinks. So let's come inside and take a look at where the scientists and the interns coexisted. Behind me is a bulletin board, which has articles about news in the dinosaur community, but also notices about the holiday party or a volleyball club. They turned an old vehicle maintenance bay into part of the mess hall. You can see inside there's an old Goodyear tire sign or some motor oil up behind me. And the interns, being the jokesters that they were, finger painted the walls with dinosaurs. Now the interns we mentioned needed a place to live, and obviously the scientists got a little bit of better spot. The interns actually lived on the second story of the mess hall. And so on that second story, you can see they have their beds there, they have their books, nightstands, all of their clothes. And as the interns left and graduated from the Institute, they would leave memorabilia behind them, sharing some of their experiences. And again, all over this space, you can see the life that the interns and the scientists have, the jokes that the interns left, the games, the old street name signs that were repainted, the Airstream camper that they had to utilize just because they needed more space. And so through all that, Diggs County was completely transformed, and that is the Dino Land that we experience today.
Is that not the craziest backstory you've ever heard? But the issue is most guests, including us, probably including you, completely missed that entire thing, or at least huge pieces of it. And that is something that's common at Disney. Imagineers purposely hide layers and layers of backstory detail so that guests can slowly uncover it themselves as they continue to explore. But for Dinoland specifically, it backfired in a very atypical way, because without the backstory, the area feels kind of cheap and tacky. Because of course, in this story, it is cheap and tacky, but guests don't know that. And so the land struggled to resonate with guests, and even as attractions were added, they didn't necessarily pick up. While Chester and Hester's treasure shop was part of park opening, the full Dino-Rama area wasn't ready until 2001, which meant that this area really lacked attractions for kids. So as a temporary placeholder, a tent was placed across from the shop, housing an attraction called Dinosaur Jubilee. It featured fossils and skeletons supposedly found by the Dino Institute, and student interns from the Institute offered guided tours of the display, which had the style of a comedy-style ride like you'd experience on Jungle Cruise. They also interestingly added stuffed versions of animals from the Ice Age, like a saber-toothed tiger and a woolly mammoth, which was a time period that happened 60 million years after dinosaurs roamed the earth. And this attraction is a perfect example of something that fit the rinky-dink roadside theme of the area, but guests did not understand that at all. And so, A, it probably wasn't the best example of the Imagineers' work anyways, because it was always meant to be temporary and they randomly put those Ice Age things in there. But B, guests did not understand why it seemed so cheap, and they were left disappointed. But then in 2001, Dino-Rama itself opened, and that was a true permanent area of the land that tied together this whole entire backstory. It was a roadside fair built in an old parking lot, which, to be clear, was not an actual old parking lot. It was a very intentional Imagineering choice that wasn't even made of actual asphalt. It was concrete disguised as asphalt in order to sustain the intense Florida weather. But guests didn't know that. And so without the understanding of the Diggs County backstory, they immediately thought that the area seemed run down, cheap, and tacky. A year later, in 2002, the Primeval Whirl ride opened. And again, this was intentionally themed as a roadside carnival-style attraction. In fact, another detail that most guests, including ourselves, did not notice or didn't notice for quite some time, this ride was a parody of the ride Dinosaur. There was the countdown as you started, the whipping around as you passed by various dinosaurs. It was actually so creative and the perfect example of a rinky-dink tourist trap nearby a prestigious institution. But again, guests didn't know any of that, and to them, it seemed like a cheap carnival-style ride that was not up to Disney standards. And while it did have a cult following, which we were proudly a part of, most guests skipped it. And so, just like Primeval Whirl, overall, this land wasn't very popular. People did like the dinosaur attraction, but the rest of the land just didn't get the traffic that it needed to see. And for years, it felt like it was pretty clear that Dinoland USA probably would not be sticking around forever. Rumors would pop up here and there, but nothing was really substantiated until one day in 2020, Disney announced that they would be closing Primeval Whirl. And fairly quickly, the ride was closed and then literally demolished and replaced with nothing. It was just a fenced off area. And at that point, guests pretty much knew that Dinoland was running on limited time. And a couple years later at D23, we finally got official confirmation that Dinoland USA would be replaced by a new land called Tropical Americas, which was going to feature movies like Encanto and Indiana Jones. Discussing Tropical Americas is a whole separate video, so I'm not going to dive into that, but I will say I do actually believe that it fits well into the park. We already have Africa, we have Asia, now we'll have Tropical Americas featuring the animals that you can find there. But it does mean that the original vision for this park, with its real animals, mythical creatures which have made a reappearance thanks to Pandora, and extinct animals is pretty much dead because there are no more extinct animals featured at Animal Kingdom. And it's sad because dinosaurs are really popular with kids, and they're also a really great way to feature animals without just making the park feel like a zoo. I am so excited for the new land, but I will always miss Dinoland USA, and I'm sure others feel the same, especially if you understand the backstory. But for now, we'll just have to look forward to what's to come. If you want to learn more about the history of Animal Kingdom, check out that Beastly Kingdom video. But for now, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week for Mouselets Monday. Bye!